after. Okay, there we go. Okay, let me share my slide back out again. All right, so jumping back in, as I mentioned, this is a NARUC innovation webinar, and NARUC is a nonprofit membership association for state public utility commissioners in 50 states, plus DC, the Virgin Islands, and Puerto Rico. And our mission is to serve in the public interest by improving the quality and effectiveness of public utility regulation. We represent a membership of about 250 elected and appointed state commissioners and hundreds of their commission staff in energy, electricity, telecommunications, water, and transportation regulation. And as I mentioned, I am with the NARUC Center for Partnership and Innovation, and we are a federally funded team supported through cooperative agreements with the Department of Energy and NIST to provide technical assistance to members. And the CPI team builds relationships, develops resources, and delivers trainings and webinars like the one today. I'll drop a link to our webpage in the chat in a few moments if you would like to take a look at any of our resources. And if you're joining the NARUC Summer Policy Summit in a couple weeks, you'll be able to get hard copies of some of our recent publications and other resources there. There'll be a table set up, and I'll drop a link for the Summer Policy Summit in the chat as well. And moving right along, my colleague, Will McCurry, who unfortunately wasn't able to join us today, put together a really great group of speakers and moderators for today's webinar. And I have the honor of introducing Commissioner Diane Berman with the New York State Public Service Commission. She has been with the commission since 2013, and we are really lucky to have her as a very active member within NARUC. She's involved in all corners of NARUC. We're really fortunate to have a member like her. And with that, I will go ahead and let her introduce her co-moderator and kick this webinar off.
Thank you so much. I'm really excited to be a part of this. I thank the National Association of Regulatory Utility Commissioners, NARUC, for hosting this. You know, AI is an important thing for regulators energy regulators to get under the hood on. We at NARUC have actually been looking at this for the last couple of years. In 2019, NARUC produced an artificial intelligence for natural gas utilities, a primer, which was a product of the U.S. Department of Energy and NARUC's natural gas partnership, which I'm lucky to chair. And we looked then about the challenges and what was being done in the artificial intelligence space in natural gas with methane emissions detection, how to utilize it to help with pipeline safety, and a whole host of things with smart meters and situational awareness. Then in 2021, NARUC, through NRRI at the time, looked at how AI was forecasting how to help utility regulators weather the COVID-19 storm, and was focused on forecasting and other ways that it could be helpful. AI has gone through a lot of different transitions. It started out with computer scientists, sort of looking at it from a coding perspective, leading into connective AI, and then expert systems AI, and then predictive analysis, which a lot of the utilities and others in the energy space have been looking at. Then it morphs into big data and now sort of technology of human thinking, and what does that look like around that. For us, we're going to get a little bit under the hood in defining AI and generative AI, as well as trying to see why it's important for regulators, why it's important in the energy space, how do we regulate, who should regulate, what does that look like, what does technology, what are we trying to do with technology, and how can it be helpful as we look forward in our regulatory space in the path forward in making some useful technology available to make everyone's job better and easier, but also to help give us the tools that we need to do to ensure proper oversight of the grid. I am so delighted to have Nora Mead Brownell as my co-moderator. She really is a star in the energy space. She's the co-founder of SB Energy Solutions, a woman-owned business providing innovation and highly skilled consulting services. Prior to this, Nora was a commissioner at the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, FERC, where she served from May 2001, when then President George Bush nominated her and she was confirmed until June 2006. Nora's tenure at FERC reflects her longstanding and unwavering commitment to fostering competitive markets to serve the public interest. She championed the development of independent transmission organizations for wholesale power. She is a strong advocate of responsive and effective independent board governance at RTOs and corporations. Prior to FERC, Nora served as a state energy regulator at the Pennsylvania Public Utility Commission from 1997 to 2001, and she helped take an active role in the rollout of electric choice in Pennsylvania. Nora served and continues to serve on many different boards, and she is just a true expert in how to be a wonderful energy regulator and how to be a wonderful positive influence in energy regulation, not only from before, but currently now. So thank you. Let me introduce Nora.
Thanks so much, Commissioner. I really appreciate it. And I truly appreciate your personal and NARUC's leadership in advancing the knowledge base for a lot of technologies, particularly those driven by AI and machine learning. I recently attended a conference on AI and energy, and we identified over 50 companies that are currently serving in the energy space. And the thing that I am so extraordinarily thrilled about is they solve multiple problems. We have everything from workforce and safety management to efficiency to a far more data that will inform our planning for both T&D, as well as the location of where to put EVs and EV charging stations. I think that we will empower customers to behave in a way that we've all hoped for, but never given the tools. And we address the issue not only of how to get to a different environment and deal with the environmental challenges of aging infrastructure, but we can increase the capacity of existing infrastructure while we plan for the future and get data that really informs our decision in a way that we're not doing today. And so I think our challenge is, as regulators, to understand what questions to ask, what are the competitors, what are the financial incentives we need, how can we manage a regulatory framework that frankly doesn't move as fast as the technology, and yet how do we leverage all of these things to lead a transition that addresses multiple issues. I'm a partner in a clean energy venture firm, and I see extraordinary developments every day. So I'm delighted to be talking about it with all of you. So thanks for having me.
Thank you so much, Nora. It really is important to look at the value that AI can provide and how we as regulators can help to shape that without being so prescriptive that we're setting technologies now that may not be there for, that may be evolving as fast as we speak. Now I'm going to introduce Greg Shannon. He's the Chief Cybersecurity Scientist for Idaho National Laboratories National and Homeland Security Directorate, and is the Chief Science Officer for the Cybersecurity Manufacturing Innovation Institute based at the University of Texas at San Antonio. Greg served a tour as the Assistant Director for Cybersecurity Strategy at the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy. He serves as a member of the U.S. Air Force Science Advisory Board, and he is a board member for the Women in Cybersecurity. So kudos to Greg. Thank you, Greg.
Yes, so I'm going to give you a brief introduction on machine learning AI, just so we have a common context for this webinar. When we say AI, artificial intelligence, there's actually kind of two ways of looking at it. There's inference, which is the statistical AI that we're most familiar with right now, and then there is also the deductive aspect, automated theorem proving. There we go. Come on, camera. There. Automated theorem proving that is going to have an impact, but is less mature than the current technique. So, chatbot GPT is the latest. The underlying is the large language models that take a lot of computation to create. But you've already had opportunities to use AI, even from a very pedestrian point of view, whether it's in applications. One of the latest ones that I saw that was intriguing is Merlin, the bird identification app, where you can listen outside. You can turn on, it'll do a sonogram, and as it's listening, it will start identifying the birds that it hears. And you can imagine the different sorts of applications you could have into the utility space, from a maintenance, from a safety point of view, with apps like that that are using machine learning to identify issues of maintenance or hazardous situations. But one thing that I think is important is to actually experience the latest chatbot, the latest innovation that's out there. What's really fascinating about chatbot is accessibility. Essentially, anyone with an internet connection right now can experience it. You do have to give it your name, an email address, and your cell phone number. So from a privacy point of view, that may be a bar too high for some. But I can assure you that of the 90–95% of the people in the US who have access, everyone under at least 15 is experiencing and playing with this right now. And so I think it's important that you understand how this is going to inform how they start to think about knowledge and learning and working. A recent story I heard was a high-end developer tried one of the chatbot applications, which is a Copilot put out by Microsoft. And he realized within minutes that 90% of what he did was now worth $0 because a chatbot could do it for him. And the other 10% was now worth 1,000 times more because he actually knew how to drive the chatbot. Let's see what else I want to say here. The way I think about chatbot is it can be somewhere between a smart and a dumb intern. You never quite trust what an intern tells you because you have to go out and fact check, but they can do a first, if it's a good intern, you'll get some useful results. So anyhow, I went and asked chatbot some questions. So next slide. So this is the query that I used to get the answer that I got. I'll be curious if you try it, if you get the same answer. Next slide. So I'm asking chatbot, which utilities are most, or with bullets, what are the most vulnerable threats to climate? How are utilities most vulnerable to climate change? And when I first asked it, it gave me a nice long, bulleted paragraphs with text that sounded pretty reasonable. Next slide. So then I asked it, what's the least vulnerable, which utilities are least vulnerable to threats due to climate change? Next slide. So geographically diverse, renewable energy, et cetera. So, you would kind of anticipate this. What's interesting here is, anyone in the world could have asked these questions and gotten these answers. So if you start to think about it in terms of, your ratepayers, they can start to be pretty well informed to the extent that, a large language model has a reasonable statistical model for how you talk about vulnerabilities due to climate change. Next slide. I did ask it, which specific utilities are most vulnerable, and it actually gave me 5 names of the ones that are most vulnerable, and it gave me 5 names of the least vulnerable. Some of the least vulnerable ones that listed I had not heard of, so I wasn't sure if it was inventing facts. So these are called hallucinations. So you never actually know if chatbot doesn't know if it's telling the truth or lying. It just gives you an answer based on what its statistical model about language says that it should give you. So it could potentially invent a company name, for example. But I encourage you, I would have put the query up here, but I didn't want to put any company names on these slides. But that's my quick introduction. Another important point about the current large language models, such as ChatGPT, the version I used is actually only trained on data through September 2021. And so that's an important thing to remember. For example, if you were to ask it about, large language models and all the writing that's been done about the current chatbots, it knows nothing about those. And so you have to remember that it's an intern who's, kind of stuck in a time machine, as it were. So back to you.
Thank you so much. I'm going to now turn it to Nora to help with the next speaker, and also if she has any thoughts on what we just heard.
Well, I will say it's really helpful to talk about what chatbot can and cannot do. One of the things I encourage everyone is to use it and use it and use it and use it again. If you remember, as I do, because I'm 107, when the internet first became deployed broadly in businesses, everybody at the bank kind of had to stumble along in order to get to take advantage of it. So don't be afraid. It's tons of fun, actually. I'm planning to make it my summer vacation. But I'm thrilled to introduce Liz Cook, who's become a good friend, probably the most brilliant data scientist I know. She's the head of grid solutions at Duquesne Light and has really led the way in how we can overcome the internal silos and the risk-averse culture that utilities have necessarily grown up to be, but has led a transition at Duquesne. I think that's an example probably for every utility in the country. And she's lots of fun too. So Liz, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Thank you, Nora. So I'm currently working at Duquesne Light. I'm the director of Advanced Grid Systems and Grid Modernization Program. I started my career here at Duquesne Light 7 years ago after I had a career as a power systems engineering consultant for Mitsubishi Electric. So I spent most of my time gathering data, building models, and running analytics for the electric utility industry, predominantly in the transmission world. And I became a road warrior. So my family and my children started to ask where I was, and I had the great opportunity to work in the utility that I was born and raised in. Duquesne Light serves Western PA, which is the city of Pittsburgh, is where I reside. And so I started as the senior manager of transmission planning in 2016. And I very quickly, assessed the transmission grid, really kind of ran all the types of studies that I knew how to run. And our grid is very unique in the fact that it's still within the territory that it was originally built over 100 years ago. And it was built for the industry. We're known for the steel industry over, the first few decades. And then as the steel industry left in the 80s, we predominantly became a utility that serves the residential customers and refocused our grid on the distribution. So I just share this perspective of where I'm coming from when I start to share, how did I kind of approach and think through using and empowering the engineers within the walls of the utility of large data and what we can do with that data. So if you think about how the grid evolved, it started with small grids in individual homes and serving, power plants and steel industries. And then as economies of scale grew, we ultimately built out the technology to be large and built the bulk power plants and the long transmission lines to serve the load areas. And we developed the largest machine in the world, the transmission grid. And that grid was built ultimately to serve a one-way power flow. We've all heard that. It was also built to serve predictable customer needs. We wake up, we go to work, we come home, we go to bed. And there was a moderate dependency of grid when we didn't have any electricity. And now we're living in a world where we all depend on electricity. But the way that we communicated and how we operated the grid as over the first 80, 90 years of the evolution was, through the thousands of connected devices. We typically used telephone service for communication. And then in really the 70s and 80s, where computers became available and computational efforts were at our fingertips, with the sensoring measuring equipment that really sprawled across our transmission grid quite rapidly. Once we saw the power of these devices, we were able to network and build a transmission grid that was quite dynamic and also relevant to the two-way. And so here we are coming into the aught years and into the now 2020s, where the system is becoming, and it's evolving, but the system that's really at focus is that distribution grid. Yes, the transmission grid is also going through an evolution because of the new energy sources that are available. And there's a significant amount of data analytics and machine learning and all that can help really unlock that. But if you think about what's happening on the distribution grid is the evolution that happened with the transmission. The edge of the grid is now becoming electrified and dynamic with customer generation. So it's evolving and the customer needs are becoming unpredictable. And we as humans have become very dependent on the grid and we have high expectations. So that's a complete flip of the switch on 3 paradigms. And so we have millions of connected devices. So here we are chugging along in an industry that is slower to move, especially as we all know with the industries around us. So I was the senior manager of transmission, and I very quickly realized that we were building a lot of transmission dependent on distribution impacts. And so I started thinking about, well, what are the impacts of distributed energy resources, which is really that active customer load, aka our customers installing solar, EVs, batteries, deploying the smart intelligent appliances that can be, managed from a third party. And that really changes the game of how the grid is designed. So therefore it has to change how we plan. So I became very involved within Duquesne Light of trying to find quick wins. Also, while this was all happening, I was a doctorate at the University of Pittsburgh student, and I started looking at data analytics and how can I use the data of our recently deployed advanced meter infrastructure, which is smart meters that have little computers in them, very low powered, but it had the voltage, the current, the watts, and the VARs that we could pull back. And I started doing my research that if we use the voltage and identify the patterns and really start to draw conclusions of how our system was connected to each other, which something is maybe new to a lot of people, is modeling the distribution grid all the way into the home is something that the industry as a whole is rapidly doing. It's not something that we had to have because our system was one-way power flow. So the effects of using data to identify topology information that we have not had became a passion of mine over the last 5 years. And so when you say data analytics, you're really discovering the patterns, drawing conclusions and gaining insights that you've never had before. And it's taking the data, cleaning it, transforming it, and really analyzing it, right? What happened? Why did it happen? The next step in that reality is where artificial intelligence steps in, where machine learning is a subset of that. So you start to take more and more data and you're building algorithms and statistical models to really make predictions and start to understand the system differently and start planning the system differently. So that was kind of the stepping stone into like, how do we embrace it? And I guess I just also want to share when we're thinking about what systems or, transformational changes need to happen within an electric utility is we have seen and we've actually learned how to deploy sensoring and measuring equipment across the transmission grid, pull the data in near real time. We've studied the latency and we run power flow solutions and we're required by standards every 4 minutes with 100,000 contingencies ran on top to determine will the next event have an incident that we need to mitigate for. So that world, now we have to take those lessons and take it into the distribution world. And to do that, we need to be able to install the sensoring and measuring, be able to extract the data. We need the communication bandwidth to do so. we need the cloud computing, we need the processing frameworks, right? We literally need to look at our IT group as no longer a service, but as the foundational source to how we're going to show up for our customers and continue to deliver that safe, reliable, and affordable power. So it's transformational in the aspect of our IT infrastructure is now becoming like the cinder blocks of the house that we will build to really continue to serve our customers. So I just wanted to share some few quick use cases. Was we deployed dynamic line rating, which is a sensoring device that we put on our transmission grid that uses machine learning algorithms to take dynamic variables to recalculate our ratings of our conductors. Very simple kind of phenomena, but it's a very challenging technology because it really starts to challenge a lot of ways that we do other things within the transmission planning and operation world. It's also being talked about as a GETS when we're talking in the industry. So that one was kind of a quick win to show the power that we were able to increase some of our lines capacity up to 25% in those conditions. And then another one I wanted to talk about was that system topology. I was able to take that data from the edge, run and develop and architect algorithms that really identified the topology so that we can build digital twins, so that we can ensure the GIS databases that we build in-house maintain their accuracy, but then also we can extract those electrical models and start running our hosting capacity maps to really drive our capacity planning so that we're prepared for the electrification of the edge. And it all started with gathering large data from the edge and then using it for multiple use cases to really create a new way of approaching how we plan our grid. I could talk a lot more about this topic, as you can tell. I know there's other panelists here, but just the idea is like you want to peel back the onion, start small, gather the data that you do have, and then start transforming and understanding that those quick wins really start to win the hearts of those within the utility space to really gravitate and drive us forward to embrace, artificial intelligence data analytics as a whole. So thanks for letting me share.
Thank you so much. It really is important, especially when we're looking at use cases. As regulators, we have to be looking at, are we regulating the right components of that chain of decision-making? How is that chain of decision-making consistent with some of our existing policies and processing frameworks that we have in place, and testing out, especially when we're looking at the technology and having to match it up with our cost recovery frameworks as well. Now I'm going to introduce Jeremy Renshaw. He's the Senior Technical Executive leading AI and quantum activities across EPRI. Dr. Renshaw leads the AI EPRI initiative, focused on accelerating the adoption of artificial intelligence and machine learning technologies across the electric power industry. He's been with EPRI since 2012. And prior to leading the AI EPRI initiative, Dr. Renshaw managed EPRI's used fuel and high-level waste group, focusing on all aspects of used nuclear fuel management, and was a project manager in EPRI's NDE program prior to that. Thank you so much, Doctor.
Oh, thank you, Commissioner. I'm very excited to be here with you today, and I think this is the perfect lineup in terms of where we're going. So I'm going to hail back to some of the comments from Greg earlier, as well as Elizabeth. So when I started making this presentation, and you can go to the next slide, I decided, how can I make this easy? So I went to ChatGPT and said, hey, ChatGPT, can you make this presentation for me? And boy, it gave it the old college try and failed miserably. So it made some slides, it put some words on the slides, but as Greg noted earlier, it did have some hallucinations. It did not do an overall good job in this certain task. So unfortunately, I had to make this myself. And related to what Elizabeth talked about, a lot of the infrastructure and the backbone that goes into these AI projects is incredibly important. And we're not going to be successful unless we have good data, good infrastructure, and good support from our collective IT departments. So I can't agree enough with what was said before. So here at EPRI, we've been working on some of these same challenges as well. And one of the things we're really trying to do is support the industry from the research and development side, and not just the industry, but the public in general as well. So we all know that the public is benefited from clean, safe, and affordable and reliable energy. So That's something that we try and support as well. 3 things that we're doing in the AI and electric power space, you can see here. We're building an AI and electric power community. We're collecting and bringing together large data sets and developing solutions in combination with many different partners. And finally, we're deepening AI expertise both in EPRI and across the electric power industry, trying to bring the 2 industries together. And so if you go to the next slide, I'll start talking about 3 different use cases that we have that are all related to resiliency. So the first one is really looking at how can we use satellite data to be able to enhance what we're doing in the resiliency space. So you've heard the quote that an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. And that's what this project is really looking at doing. So we take satellite imagery in a multispectral band. And what I mean by that is not just the visible band, but also the infrared and the UV that are on each side of that. And then we can combine that and look at certain areas of vegetation near power lines that are dead or dying. And in this way, utilities can go and look at satellite imagery, which is getting more and more cheap to access and more prevalent across the world, and very easily and quickly find, hey, these are the areas that are at high risk where we can go and do some tree trimming or tree removal to prevent them from landing on our power lines and causing outages. Now, of course, as much as we would love to prevent as many things as we can, we may not be able to prevent people digging and hitting power lines, or a squirrel jumping across the power line and getting zapped and causing outages, or storm damage and different things like that. So as much as we would like to prevent things with projects like this, if we go to the next slide, we can talk a little bit about what are we doing to respond to this. So many of you have probably heard of Google's Learning to Run challenge. And so this is a challenge that EPRI put out and has had active for a number of years, which is the Learning to Run a Power Network challenge, where we look at reinforcement learning, which is essentially gamifying a power grid and looking at how, if we perturb it with different types of scenarios, under voltage, over voltages, loss of a line, or different things like that, how can this reinforcement learning agent adapt to and respond to different challenges, with penalties if it does poorly and rewards if it does well. So in doing this millions of times, it can learn how to run a power grid most effectively. And what we found from this is that in some cases, we see actually superhuman behavior of the AI and machine learning algorithm, whereas in other cases, it may not perform as well as a human operator. So right now, what we see for this type of tool is really a decision support agent, where, as Elizabeth mentioned, we have an incredibly complex power grid. We're making it more complex by adding large numbers of renewables that turn on and off at different periods of time. We have prosumers instead of consumers that are now sometimes consuming energy, sometimes producing it, and so many more connected devices. So we see that the energy network, which was already extremely complex, is becoming exponentially more so. So a tool like this could really help our operators to operate more effectively by providing optional support to running the power grid. So we're very excited with where this project has headed in the past and where it's going in the future. And then if we go to the next slide, we can apply AI not only on the power grid side, but also to our operational power plants, giving us some flexibility and resiliency in those. So this is a project that we have that's looking at dispatch optimization. So how can we optimize the utilization of the power plant resources we have so that they can be maintained and operated reliably, but also at a low cost? And so what this tool does, it's a software tool that uses machine learning to help understand how and when different types of plants should be turned on to meet energy needs, but also to minimize the upcoming required maintenance that would be used. And what I mean here is an operator may be at a site that has 5 or 6 different plants that may be turned on, or different units that may be turned on or off at different times of the day. This type of a tool can help them optimize how and when to use those assets. So these are just a few examples of how resiliency can be supported by artificial intelligence and machine learning. So I will turn it back over Those are the end of my comments. Looking forward to the panel that we have.
Great, thank you so much. That was terrific. And we have a lot of content here, so I'm going to rush through introductions. I'm delighted to welcome Sean Remington, who is from Eversource. Eversource, for those of you who don't know, it is in the Northeast, one of the largest utilities, gas and electric, and facing every single impact of climate change that you could possibly face. And he is in charge of the cyber threat management, but has had lots of roles and has really created some thoughtful comments about how to integrate AI while being very careful and creating a framework so that it is serving the needs as opposed to getting away from us. So Sean, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you so much. So a few quotes here to begin. I think, Sundar Pichai from Google, CEO of Google, really kind of says it well. Is AI is one of the most profound things working in them, right? It's more profound than fire electricity. When we look at what Elon Musk says on the total opposite side of this, he's very clear. This is one of the biggest existential threats, right, to our existence. And so I think it's probably somewhere both leaders in the tech era are saying, hey, this is something to pay attention to. It's profound. It's dangerous. It's potentially going to change the world in ways we can't even imagine yet. Next slide, please. But I think, getting into, go to the next slide. So I think getting into what is, and I want to really pick on generative AI, right? So there's different, and I think Greg started off the way that there's different types of artificial intelligence that we've come to know, and some are theoretical, some have been in practice for some time. So when we look at, a lot of what's on the ground today, and a lot of machine learning models are doing incredible things around efficiency or understanding data or even driving cars. We're doing predictive analytics, right? So originally we were talking about, hey, there's code. Code is X plus Y equals results. And so that result's always going to be the same. It's a logical operation. You can fake out randomness in true logical code, but it's really very much one way to go. And then we got to kind of predictive analytics, where we had the result will change based on our data, and the data itself will influence the actual results we get. And we may not always get exactly the same answers, though we're going down a path where our data really helps us predict. And the more we tune our data and the more we tune our models, the more we can predict. So that's a really interesting and profound technology we've had over the last 10 years roughly, right? Now we're coming into, over the last year and a half, 2 years, this idea of generative AI and actually being practical. Especially this year, we've heard a lot in the news, right? ChatGPT and some of the others like Bard that have come out. So in this space, it's something completely different and profound. Uses predictive analytics to create it, but it at the end of the day is not really predictive so much as it is generative. And so that's this new term, generative. And so it is capable of creating things, creating content that is indistinguishable from content created by humans. We've seen this in chat. We've seen it in music. We've seen it in images and art now, and we'll get to some of the risks that go along with that and some of the other potential problems. But that is at the heart of it, what it is and why it's so different than what we've seen in the past. So thinking about this from a cyber perspective, right? I always say, how many IQ points does it take to do something terrible, right? From a cybersecurity perspective. And when I look at that, and generative AI is now bringing down that threshold of how many IQ points you need to do something terrible, either from a cybersecurity perspective, from a physical security perspective, that's where I start to get a little bit more alarmed than I have in the past and start to really pay attention to these technologies. Next slide, please. So talking about risks, right? So some major risks here are this, but these are going to expand and go over time, right? So data loss, sending out data into ChatGPT. I think there already were some breaches with some major electric vendors is, working around the world where they were putting code out there, and then the chats had a bug and they got leaked, right? I think it was Samsung had a big issue. Malicious code I kind of talked about already. I think, the ability for someone to create malware, right? You've got to be pretty good to get through, especially a mature security program's sensors, and there's multiple layers of defense. As that IQ, as the number of IQ points you need, the number of intelligence, the number of experience, the amount you need to know goes down, right? That threat will increase. Plagiarism, I mean, you could ask these things to create content for you, and it's just parroting more or less somebody else's words, or throwing in their thoughts and their phrases. It's also, especially in digital art, this has been a major issue. So especially if I say do it in the style of a content creator of any type of medium, you can get back some very similar results to the actual original content. Automation is gonna be huge. These generative, frameworks can create code. They can act as a lawyer, though they tell you can't, but it sounds like a lawyer to me when they say things like that. They can, write policies very quickly. They can do test algorithms very quickly. Looking in the IT space is where I'm really focused. But, going outside of that, we're going to see the ability to think like a human continue to grow. And so right now we're already at the threshold for it doing stuff almost as well as a human. Certain things like logic and reasoning, it's not quite as good at yet when we're talking about the large language models, but they're going to get there. And it's only as good as the data it's been trained on, right? So a lot of it was trained back, ChatGPT is trained, as Greg said, back in September. Now with plugins, though, you can get it to go search stuff on the web today, and it will go pick up what it finds, and it may be misinformation. So you're going to end up in situations where the content getting created is getting created by AI, or is getting created by potentially threat actors who are trying to put misinformation out there, and now it's being parroted back to people just asking simple questions, right? And finally, and this one really scares me, is deepfakes, right? So it's not too hard to create content at this point. There are services out there that will do it, video and audio, and so that's only going to get worse. It's going to become more and more prolific to the public, and how easy it is and how cheap it is to get. To copy somebody else, copy their voice, copy their syntax, talk like them. This isn't simple soundboards. This is literally speaking like Sean, right? And so that's the type of thing that worries me as well when we start talking again about cyber risk, cyber threats, but also going into the greater humanity risks and humanity threats, as we see, threat actors continually using anything they can get to either have financial gain, or destruction, or some other type of persistence within, our environments. Next slide, please. So, some of the implications I kind of hit on here, but I think, what we really get down to is we have to understand the risks of generative AI, and I'm really going to pick on that because it in itself is a whole new class of artificial intelligence we got to be really careful with. And we probably, and to be honest with you, the industry is asking to be regulated to some degree. When I'm talking about industry, I'm talking about the technical industry, right? So the people creating these generative AI models. And so as a society, right, we have to start balancing the benefits and the risks. We're going to see a huge disruption in our job markets, in our technical spaces, in the way that some companies operate due to this. I mean, I was trying to create a draft policy for artificial intelligence for Eversource, and guess what I used? I said, hey, ChatGPT, create me one. To Greg's point, and I always use the same thing. I say, hey, it's kind of like, an intern. I got to look over what it did, but it might get me started, and then I might ask a couple more questions to get some more data back. And now maybe I cut down my work because it's like I have another person who's incredibly responsive. And so that's an interesting thing we have to think through over time. When we're looking at preparing an organization here too, is, you got to have clear policies and standards. You got to really weigh the risks. Where's the benefits versus where are the risks? What's the balancing act you want to run, right? You got to train people and promote the awareness of artificial intelligence for the world. and for your corporation, for the use cases they're going to have open dialogue, right? Because they're going to think of things you didn't, because it's also new. And really stay on top of, through some, in my opinion, some committees and some governance around how we're doing this from a legal perspective, from a technical perspective. Where can we make inroads? Where can we really start to provide value? And how do we do that safely, maybe even internally, where we're not, directly relying on some of the tech giants out there to be the provider of all of our data down the road. So more or less, that's where I wanted to go. And I hope, and thank you for the rest of the panel as well. Back to you.
We struggle with is, when we do hear some of these doomsday issues in terms of trying to set limits on AI regulation, and it can be a little bit scary. And it really comes back to me, I think, as a regulator, in determining how are we trying to regulate, what framework are we trying to regulate, what other regulations and regulators outside of the energy space may also be trying to regulate the same thing. And then how does our current regulatory process support us utilizing these technologies, in this case AI or generative AI, in a way that helps us with our regulatory processes. It wasn't but just a few years ago that we struggled with getting drones to be utilized within the utility space for system planning and other things that were done. Part of the challenges also is having the expertise with staff, and then also looking at data quality, access, privacy, and governance issues. And so it really is important for us to kind of look and understand some of the use cases, some of the ways that we still need to have human accountability and the metrics in that. And then how do we ensure that, just because we put in a question or we're utilizing AI, doesn't mean that the answer we get is actually understanding our current systems and processes and the current structure and organizationally what needs to be done from that a true human component. Now I'm going to turn it back to Greg with some comments, and then we'll open it up for questions. I do know that we do have some questions, a lot related to dynamic load models as well, and looking at how to use that in a way that is helpful.
Thank you. I'm sorry. Thank you, Diane. Yes, and time check. Bob, how much time do you want me to take to do this? I know we talked about going over the hour to handle questions as they come in.
We have about, I'd say we have about four minutes right now, and then we're going to open it up for some questions too that come in, and some other thoughts from some of the other panelists. Okay,
I'll try and take only three. A few thoughts here. So, I'm focusing on kind of the machine learning part. This is where you have data, you have modeling, whether it's data science, whether it's reinforcement learning, the large language models, kind of all of those wrapped up, the kind of statistical based AI. Before I go through my list here, I do want to comment on the modeling aspect. It's something I didn't put in here. If you're going to have an AI do reinforcement learning to try and find an optimized response to outages and so on, and climate events as it affects your power and your distribution, transmission, and generation systems, the model is going to matter, because the AI reinforcement learning algorithms will find the corner cases in your models, and it's not going to do the reasonable thing. It's going to do the thing that you've told it to optimize. And a small example of that is Eric Schmidt, from the ex-CEO of Google. He was giving a talk, and he talked about a reinforcement learning case. It was a simple game where you're in a motorboat and you're trying to score points by shooting things or running things over, or not getting hit by things. And the reinforcement learned that essentially go in a circle as fast as you can and shoot continuously as fast as you can, and that's the best strategy. And so as a human, it's like, well, that's kind of boring. So that's just kind of a perspective on, be careful what your assumptions are, and the quality of the model really makes a difference. So some positives, as has been mentioned, the analysts get superpowers. They can potentially deal with incidents much faster, much more completely. The level of expertise becomes less of an issue. You're not always going up to your tier 3 response team. Your tier 1 staff can handle that. It also gives your operators, as you're designing the system, as your operating system, access to best practices. Side note, it also gives them access to worst practices, and hopefully they can tell the difference. Kind of neutral is everyone has regulatory expertise. So I could just imagine public hearings now where everybody is sitting on their phone, and as a commissioner makes a statement, people are fact checking it. They're asking chatbot, is there an alternative view, or what's a supporting view of that, and getting back a very cogent, succinct response. It may be a little bland. It may not be fully well thought out. You might, if you ask them further questions, they may go, let me ask chatbot before I answer your follow-up question to my question. It can also write computer code, which is good for people in the operations and the design, but your adversaries can use it for that also. In terms of a colleague of mine was asking chatbot about some arcane protocols that, knew that they were arcane, knew that they were documented on the internet, but was just curious if the chatbot could help write code to interface with those, and it actually could. And with a few tweaks, he was able to get it to work for the system that he was thinking about. On the negative, data quality matters. You have to remember that at least for chatbot, it has ingested the internet in all its glory and ignorance and intelligence. And as long as that's kind of why it's just an intern quality. You never quite know what you're going to get. And as mentioned earlier, it's very useful for deception. I heard a statistic where they only need now about 2 seconds of your voice to focus the model on your voice and generate a suitable fake. So like if you pick up the phone and answer a wrong number, just saying hello may be long enough for them to do a one-shot retraining of the model and generate a compelling fake that, significant people in your life may find, believe it's you. So with that, I'll turn it back to you, Diane, to take us into Q&A.
So one of the questions is really looking at the approach to apply this to the interconnection to high bulk voltages, and looking at dynamic load models effectively updating with these data in seasonal next day operational studies. I don't know if anyone has any thought, particularly around the dynamic load models.
So, hi, this is Elizabeth. Yeah, I think there's a great space that we could, step into. When we talk about the dynamic load models, I'm assuming you're talking about the load models that need to be represented into our power flow solutions to run our stability suite of studies. And, as that has been an ever evolving world, with a large amount of our community invested in, developing the models to mimic the real time response. And so if you think about what has been missing is really that real-time data, and where we saw the power in PMUs, but really ensuring that we can pull the data to then create the models to then make them more intelligent, is a pathway that I think effectively the industry is working on, but we still haven't pulled them into our overall comprehensive processes, because it's almost like all of the studies that are being done out at the transmission level, are in flight. So how do you stop and pause and then change and pivot? So that's really comes down to a people and a processy issue more than like creating and developing the technology to develop the model to then run it. But there's a space there, and it definitely should be continue to be engaged in. So I think that was the models we were talking about when you asked Jamie. So hopefully it was.
I'm wondering if you are looking at this in terms of predictive analytics and what is currently being done as it relates to hydrogen. How do you take this and utilize it perhaps in blending and operationally? Is there a way to use AI to help us with locating the right place, and any thoughts on that? If anyone's looking at that issue.
I think if I could just comment, we're looking at a lot of applications for hydrogen. The cost effectiveness is not yet entirely clear, although there are uses, more work needs to be done, but the whole predictive analytics is being used in so many ways. As I sat in the bunker at PG&E, I saw a number of technologies that one of which predicted with 95% accuracy exactly where our transmission line was going to be hit and how many objects would hit it. And in 100-mile-an-hour winds with 120 million dead trees, 95% accuracy is pretty extraordinary. So I think predictive analytics are happening in almost every aspect of the utility space, including some new applications and new companies that I'm seeing for water, which I think is, for those of us who've been at the state level, kind of the neglected resource for which a big price tag is coming through. So all of these, all of the machine learning and AI models help with predictive technologies. Again, as long as you have the guide rails. And I think not letting the concerns overcome our willingness to really take a look at these things does a great disservice to our customers and frankly to the companies themselves and largely to the economy. So I'm hoping, and it'd be great to see the work continue that you all have done such a good job beginning, to see perhaps NARUC get together with DOE and IEEE. I know IEEE would be interested in actually presenting a lot of the different companies, how they're using AI and what problems they're solving. Tremendous number of use cases out there that I think would encourage people to really look at this with a different aspect. Again, respecting that there are risk issues, but there are risk issues in putting your personal information on Facebook.
Yeah, I think that's really helpful. I think as, sort of as regulators, utilities, and other stakeholders continue to collaborate, we have to look at how to apply AI and other tools and really the evolving nature of AI and our practices to improve the safety, reliability, resilience, affordability, and environmental stewardship of our grid, and working closely with US DOE and others really to foster that beneficial exchange of information. Really does come down to also how do we set appropriate regulatory structures and frameworks that aren't tying us too much in a silo or to today's world, because things are changing so quickly. And then how do we look about making sure that we are still properly evaluating the role of technology and then the necessary costs issues, minimizing and mitigating the risks to that. I think we might need to turn now to Jessica to help in the end of the webinar.
Thank you, Commissioner Berman and Nora, for being wonderful moderators today. And a huge thank you to all of our speakers for the time that you put into slides and your great presentations today to our registrants. Yes, I'll just take a quick moment to highlight our next 2 innovation webinars. We do these about every month. The next one will be on July 27th. And for that one, we'll be diving into the topic of community solar. And then in August, we're scheduled for August 17th. The topic is TBD at the moment, but as you can see, our topics vary every single month. So we hope that you join us for an hour next month to hear about community solar. And with that, I just want to say thank you again to everyone for joining and to our speakers and moderators. Hope everyone has a great holiday weekend.